All right, now we want to implement updating vehicles. So I'm going to borrow some code from this action, create vehicle. So select, duplicate. Now we need to make a few minor changes here. First, we should change HTTP post to HTTP put. And here in our route, we need to get a parameter ID. So earlier I applied this route attribute on the vehicle's controller. So all our routes start with /API/vehicles. Now when I add this parameter here, the actual route would be something like this: /API/vehicles/ID. Now I'm going to change the action name to update vehicle. Next, I'm going to add a parameter here. So because we have a parameter called ID in the route, here we need a parameter with the same name. So in our action, we have two parameters: ID, which is in the route, and vehicle resource, which is in the body of the request. All right, so first we do model state validation. If it's invalid, we return bad request. So far, so good. Then we do the mapping. However, in this case, we want to read this vehicle from the database first. So context.vehicles.find async. We put the identifier here and await the result. So now we have a vehicle. Then when mapping a vehicle resource to a vehicle, we want to use this vehicle object that we loaded from the database. So we pass that as the second argument to the map method. So we map the vehicle resource to this vehicle object. Next, we set the last update. Now we don't need this line here because we're not going to add this vehicle to the database. Delete. We save the changes and finally map the result back to a vehicle resource and return it to the client. Okay, now in Postman, I'm going to change the type of our request to a put request. And in the URL, I'm going to add the ID of one of our vehicles. Now send. Okay, we got an internal server error. And here's the exception. The property ID on entity type vehicle is part of a key and so cannot be modified or marked as modified. This problem happened on this line when we mapped a vehicle resource to an existing vehicle. So AutoMapper set the ID property of the vehicle, and that's something that Entity Framework doesn't like because the ID property here is the key, and by definition, keys should not be modified. To fix this, we go to Mapping Profile. Here's a mapping from vehicle resource to vehicle. I'm going to add for-member v goes to v.id, operation goes to operation.ignore. So this way I tell AutoMapper to ignore mapping this property. Save. Okay, let's send one more request. Here's another exception. Violation of primary key constraint. Cannot insert duplicate key in object vehicle features. Once again, the reason for this exception lies in our mapping. So when mapping this features property, note that we are creating new vehicle feature objects. Now for this vehicle that we're updating, this vehicle already has a feature with the ID 1. So when we map our vehicle resource to this vehicle, we end up adding a new vehicle feature with the exact same key. And that's why we get this exception here. The duplicate key value is 10 and 1. So 10 is the ID of vehicle and 1 is the ID of feature. Now mapping collections is a little bit more tricky, and that's what I'm going to talk about in the next lecture.